Friends, fellow Singaporeans, it's great to see so many of you. Thank you all for coming for this rally for Ms. Jaslyn Goh, the SDP candidate for Yihua's SMC. It's an honor and privilege to be here speaking to you this evening. But before I go into the substance of this talk, I have to discuss an encounter I had this morning during our walkabout at the Adam Road Food Centre. I also have to make a request of you. I'd like to ask all of you to please kindly refrain from booing when I tell you who I met and what we discussed. As you know, the SDP has fought a clean and fair campaign without stooping to the level of some of our opponents, and thus I would ask you not to boo this person. If you really do not like him and his policies, just put a cross next to the rocket for SDP and its candidates on Friday. And tell your friends and family to do the same. That is the best way to send a message to our politicians. Anyway, as we were visiting Adam Road Food Centre, we encountered Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan. I said, don't boo. And his team. He said that I had misinterpreted his remarks on volunteers in my speech at the rally last night. And he wanted me to issue a clarification. Now, for those of you who were at Commonwealth last night, you know that I took pains to read out word for word the corrected version that was in the Today newspaper, as I thought it reflected the values of some of the PAP leadership. This morning at Adam Road, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan pointed out to me that even the corrected version in the Today newspaper did not tell the full story. And he suggested that I read his Facebook post and watch the video of his entire speech in order to better understand what he was saying. So, in the spirit of gentlemanly debate, I did that. And I will quote his Facebook post in full. I'm sorry if I'm boring you a little bit, but this is what I promised I would do. So, quoting from Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan's Facebook post, he said, I would seriously review MP allowances, but that is not actually the key issue. The more fundamental question of what leaders do we need? I believe 3 prerequisites are essential: honesty, competence, compassion. Sounds a bit familiar, right? Now, honesty, he said, the PAP insists on absolute honesty, full disclosure, no cheating, no lying, no favors. The moment we get dishonest politicians in Parliament, that will be the beginning of the end. Competence, he says. In many countries, politicians are full-time politicians. In fact, their entire career has been spent standing for elections since they were students. They have never worked in a real job, run a business, or practiced a profession. We believe it's better to get people with real-life experience in Parliament. Do you think he's insulting his military colleagues? Back to his Facebook post. The question of whether they should be full-time or part-time is actually secondary. The real question is whether they can serve the residents well, given their experience and commitment. Compassion, this is the heart of all. We need people with a heart to serve other people. Without this element, politics is downright dangerous. If we can all agree that these 3 elements are absolutely essential, then we can explore reducing allowances. One seductive notion is to eliminate the allowance totally, make it 0. Now, nobody said we're going to make it 0, but this is what he said. So he says, let's do a thought experiment. If the allowance was 0, only 2 kinds of people can afford to be full-time MPs. First, wealthy people, but hardly representative. Second, people who see politics as an avenue to earn money on the side. Corruption. So 0 is not an option. Nevertheless, we can and should continually review this question of a reasonable allowance. This is something that can be debated on another day. But never forget the more crucial issues of honesty, competence, and compassion. These are non-negotiable, end quote. Sorry you had to sit through that, but that was Dr. Balakrishnan's full Facebook post. So this morning, Dr. Balakrishnan clarified that he was not referring to volunteers in general, but to politicians exclusively. So I appreciated that clarification and told him so. I also told Dr. Balakrishnan that I disagreed with his point of view on a philosophical point, and I would share my views this evening at the rally. First and foremost, Dr. Balakrishnan seems to imply that those who have spent their life in the service of the unions, or maybe even the military, as organizers, listening to workers, campaigning for their rights, are undesirable as politicians. That seems very odd. Maybe that's why so many unionists are now helping out with the alternative parties. Secondly, his view of honesty in politicians seems to be extremely limited. It's limited to the negative idea of not lying, not cheating, or not giving or receiving favors. Now, I want you to listen carefully. This is very different from the SDP view of honesty. Honesty to us is much more. Honesty in a politician means having an honest view of yourself, knowing that you are primarily a servant of the people, not a master of the people. You are not entitled to some extraordinarily high salary just because you're a scholar who doesn't take bribes. Honesty means realizing that you are in your job because the people trusted you to speak up for them, and you owe your job to them. In the words of the famous movie, the people should not be afraid of the government. The government should be afraid of the people. And that, Dr. Balakrishnan, is real honesty, in my opinion. You are entitled to disagree. Finally, if you watch the video, he makes some really shocking comments about doctors who operate for free on poor people, but I'm not going to comment on that. So I'm also going to address some of the other issues brought up by the other PAP candidates during their rally in Pitti Road last night. I'd like to state up front, though, I'm very, very glad and pleased that they are engaging us on the issues, and they're not going down to the gutter politics of the past. First of all, DPM Tharman was reported in the Straits Times as saying, free healthcare will mean raising taxes. I would encourage DPM Tharman to read our healthcare proposal in full. First of all, the SDP healthcare plan does not involve free healthcare. There are co-payments involved, but these co-payments are for the highest and are for non-emergency care. In other words, if you're the guy who likes your local GP so much that you want to go and pour out your burdens to him, you have to pay a little bit more for that. But if you have a real illness, the SDP healthcare plan ensures that co-payments are kept to a minimal. Secondly, we propose raising taxes on the top 1% of taxpayers to a level that was seen in the year 2000. DPM Tharman instead, in the budget 2015, proposed raising taxes on the top 5% of income earners, but at lower rates. I guess spreading the misery is part of the plan, but if I was in the top 2 to 5% of taxpayers, I would be quite sad that it was DPM Tharman and not the SDP who was deciding their tax rates. And thirdly, the plan proposed by the SDP is a universal health insurance plan. We proposed it in 2012. In 2015, finally, the PAP is coming up with MediShield Life, which is actually a watered-down version of a universal healthcare plan with high deductibles, co-payments, as well as a cap on benefits. Now, I'm quite glad that MediShield Life has universal coverage. It's better than MediShield with its long list of exclusions. But do you know that as you grow older, your premiums for MediShield Life go higher and higher? And this will seriously affect senior citizens, most of whom have very little savings or very little money in their MediSave accounts. So the current policy is to tap on children and grandchildren to pay MediShield Life premiums for senior citizens. And this places a significant burden on the next generation. This is precisely the problem that Ms. Sim Ann said last night the PAP wants to avoid. In fact, this generation is a highly sandwiched generation. They have heavy burdens to pay in childcare and children's education costs. At the same time, they're asked to pay for their parents' increasingly high healthcare costs. And finally, DPM Tharman, we mentioned the French system because we wanted to benchmark our healthcare system against the best healthcare system in the world, as ranked by the World Health Organization. As Singaporeans, we deserve the best. Secondly, Mr. Christopher D'Souza questioned our use of part of the current defense budget to finance the increase in government spending for the National Healthcare Plan. Now, the SDP is completely committed to the defense of Singapore. I enlisted in Temasek Green in March 1983, and I finally received my MR certificate 1 month ago. I disrupted twice. In those 31 years, I've seen the SAF go from 1G to 2G to 3G, and who knows, in the future we'll have an army of cyborgs programmed by some little gamer over here. What the SDP is calling for is transparency and accountability in all government spending, including defense. We're asking for smart defense spending. There are many questions which have been raised, for example, about the F-35 fighter, which has been called the fighter plane which cannot fight. It would be good for issues that involve huge amounts of taxpayer dollars and have had serious concerns raised by other international experts to be debated openly. These issues have been debated, even in countries like Turkey and Israel, which are fighting wars right now. So there's no reason why they cannot be debated in Singapore. Next, Ms. Sim Ann is quoted on the Channel News Asia website as saying, "The opposition parties say the government purposely does not spend money on people. In Holland Bukit Timah, we know that if we don't keep money for a rainy day, we aren't thinking about our children's future." End quote. Now that is precisely our point. The government of today is so far out of touch with the people that they don't realize it is raining on us every day today. They seem to live in a different world, in a world in which mythical creatures like unicorns exist, where food is cheap, where $1,000 a month can buy you an HDB flat, and $8 can get you a cardiac bypass operation. You and I know that that is a fantasy. If we do not invest in our people today, there will be no future for our children tomorrow. You need people in Parliament who live in the real world, who can ask the good questions about where our money goes, about whether our savings, our taxes are going to be used to invest in people of Singapore rather than some high-profile fancy projects. And finally, and most disturbingly, Mr. Liang Enghua, the fourth member of the Holland Bukit Timah team, is reported of saying that he did not want to impose a minimum wage of foreigners. This was apparently met with an enthusiastic response from the PAP crowd. And this is very troubling to me because it borders on xenophobia. In the SDP, we believe that a fair, universal minimum wage will benefit Singaporeans as much as it benefits foreign workers. Singaporeans will not have to compete with low-wage workers who are willing to work for much less than we do. The exploitation of migrant workers will stop if there's a minimum wage. These people build our schools, our roads, our homes, and they live in miserable conditions after paying huge sums of money to unethical and exploitative agents. The least they deserve is a fair wage for their work. Thank you. As you know, I'm a medical doctor and a professor at the university. I have a relatively comfortable life, but I joined the SDP and came forward to be involved in the political process because I became frustrated in my work in a public hospital. I don't believe that healthcare is a commodity because most people do not choose to be sick. I'd given plenty of feedback, but realized the only way to make a difference was to get into Parliament, ask good questions, and demand answers. I was a guest speaker at the SDP Boat Key rally. This was videotaped, and the video went viral. Many people were concerned I would lose my job. In fact, in 2012, I became even more prominent as one of the faces of the SDP healthcare policy that was very critical of the Ministry of Health financing. But instead of losing my job, in 2013, I was promoted to full professor with tenure. And I think this is a strong signal that Singapore has changed. the knuckle duster era that Ms. Teo Solang described earlier on is over. There's no more fear. There should be no more fear for Singaporeans to speak up. In this election, you can see Roy Ng and Han Hui Hui are speaking up in front of the crowds. A few years ago, they would never have been allowed to speak. I have received a lot of support from friends and families for this campaign. Many people say to me, thank you for speaking up for us. But there was one lady, an older lady, who said to me, why are you doing this? Why are you going against the PAP? I don't think it's a good idea. So I respect her, and I asked her why. And she said to me, the government has been good to us. I receive a pension every month. My healthcare is taken care of as I hold the civil service card. I don't have to pay anything. When I go to hospital, I can even stay in an A-class ward for $10 a day. The PAP government has been really good to us. Why do you want to take them on? And I said to her, do you know, Auntie, you were one of the lucky few who joined the civil service before 1984. After that, the pension scheme was over. That was when the PAP really cared about the people of Singapore. The young people today don't have that option. They have to depend on their CPF, which is locked into their housing. They have to pay out of pocket for their medical costs. She seemed a bit skeptical, and I'm not sure if I won her over. But I think she made an important point to me. The PAP of the past is not the PAP of today. Our seniors accepted some of the draconian measures of the PAP of the past because they were convinced the PAP of the 1960s, when there was strong opposition in Parliament, had good policies which benefited the people. The people of today are not so sure, because they hear that the ministers of today need to be paid high salaries, otherwise they'll become corrupt. That is why this election is about values, choosing the right people with the right values, people who care about Singapore and Singaporeans. Jaslyn Goh is one such person. She has done very well for herself despite coming from a humble background. She's a creative individual despite not having government scholarships to go to fancy universities. A true Singaporean entrepreneur, she's built up a business with her husband and done well. She has two lovely children, one of whom was my chaperone at the SDP anniversary dinner. In fact, the very first time I met her, she was MC for some SDP event. She does that all the time. But this time, she's stepping forward on her own as a candidate for the Ihua SMC. She's not afraid to speak up and to be the voice of those who are marginalized. She will speak up for Singaporeans, make her and the rest of us your voice in Parliament. Thank you.